Harsh winter weather. We all lived it, and it hit Canadian National Railway in the first quarter. It hurt the company's revenue gains. Now we have spring in full swing and a new Alberta premier who plans on cancelling those government crude-by-rail contracts. That could add some pressure. JJ Ruest, President and CEO of CN Rail, joins us now with more on this and what's ahead for the business. Good to see you, sir.
Good afternoon, Greg.
So
Happy to be here.
We have that harsh winter behind us. We saw it show up in the GDP numbers this morning. It hurt a lot of companies, including yours. But I imagine now you have customers who couldn't get things out in the harsh cold of winter. Are you going to see an explosion of demand for your services, and how do you handle that?
So actually, we had a fairly strong beginning to the winter. December was solid. The first 2 or 3 weeks of January was also solid. And because this year we entered the winter with much more resource than the year before, we had more qualified crews, more cars, more locomotive. So we did produce 3% volume growth on revenue ton mile basis, which is actually the best performance of all the railroads in North America. So when we finished the first quarter, even though, as you said, we've all experienced that very cold winter, we had very little backlog. We were very current on most commodities, including especially the Western commodities like crude, like potash, like grain, like the forest products. So we finished the first quarter, challenged on costs, but from a business point of view with our customers, we did move their product to market.
So it's nice to have the weather behind us, but now with spring here, as I was just saying, we have a new premier being sworn in today in Alberta, Jason Kenney. Now, when he campaigned and when he became premier designate, he repeated his vow to kill off those crude-by-rail contracts with both your company and CP Rail. He called them corporate welfare and a market interference. If he holds true to that promise, what does that do for your crude-by-rail business?
Yeah, so I see our mandate as moving any natural resource product that needs to go to market, including crude. And as you probably know, last year, from sometime in the spring and the summer, we started to really crank up and ramp up capacities, whether it's cruise track capacity, to be able to move more natural resource, including crude by rail. We obviously do that typically for private companies, which is what we did last year. And the capacity that we create is available to any players in Alberta who wants to restart moving crude by rail, including the government and or anybody who might want to designate as a person that want to use this contract. What's important to say is that we did produce as much as 250,000 barrels in December. And then it came to a sudden stall when a decision was made to cut back the production. But that capacity is available today to Alberta to ramp it back up almost to 300,000 barrels or slightly more. So it's an opportunity for Alberta to consider.
Would you agree with Mr. Kenney that the market mechanism would work better, that if there was a demand to move it, your company would get that business anyway without having to sign this multi-billion-dollar deal?
I think what's important is the spread, right? The spread needs to come back to the $14, $15 or in that range, minimum range, which is the spread that last year was supporting crude by rail. And when the spread is in that range, the market functions one way or another. So it's a question of who wants to invest in those assets, whether private equipment or the government of Alberta. But when the capacity restriction are removed and the spread move in that range, the capacity actually today is available prompt from the railroad to move crude by rail for Alberta, because we've been working on creating this capacity for the last 6 to 9 months.
Now, when it comes to the longer term by moving crude by rail, people will be critical, saying, well, it's great to have that boon right now, but eventually what the province wants to do is move it by pipeline. Is that part of the long-term plan, knowing that this is not going to be a nice, juicy source of revenue forever?
So we've always assumed that eventually pipeline will be built, and the role of the railroad, including CN, is to be a bridge role, a role to move product to market till the time the pipeline have the capacity sufficient to move while it's produced in Alberta. So we've never believed our role to be a long-term role. Our role is to be, the bridge between the time where the capacity is there and is there enough the pipeline capacity to bring it to market. So could be, in our view, it was going to be or is a role for the next 3 years. And after that, we assume that most of the pipeline issues are resolved and the pipeline are put in operation and moving the product to market, including maybe to Asia.
So given that, and the crude by rail, that eventually it will evolve into a different means of transport, hopefully through pipelines, and the fact that you are a mature industry, where does the growth come from CN Rail? What are the plans there?
Yeah. So the growth comes from the same place it did the last decade. It comes from a very wide range of different commodities. Intermodal is a great product, great service, because it moves everything and anything that consumers consume in the big cities of the Midwest and Ontario and Quebec. So port business and domestic container business is always going to be a big business. Natural resource in Canada, whether it's potash from the prairies, grain. We have a new mine opening in Alberta this month to move thermal coal to Asia. We have a propane terminal in Rupert that's opening. That gives the opportunity for propane from Alberta and BC to be able to get a better paying market in Asia through the AltaGas terminal. So trade is a very important aspect for CN, trade with the United States, trade with Asia, trade with Europe, and moving natural resource, manufactured product, consumer product, and crude, in our view, is just one of those products that it may be quite cyclical, but quite significant. And the role of CN during those years is quite important. We can really be of help to get this product to market. At the same time, as we know, the commodities rotate, and at some point, crude-by-rail will be turning, will probably go back to the pipeline, at least in most part.
Now, you mentioned the importance of Canada's ports there. Are we doing enough when it comes to our port infrastructure? Politicians love to talk about putting money into infrastructure when they're on the campaign trail. Are you actually seeing it being put to work in the right places in this country to ensure we can get our products out?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of activities taking place at the port. There's a lot of investment taking place at the port. CN has two major projects in the Port of Vancouver in terms of infrastructure in the city to expand the capacity to the South Shore and the North Shore. What we would hope that happen is not so much more funding, but faster funding, faster decisions. So the time it takes from concept to start up after construction, the delays are long, and that's where the issue came in. So everybody means well, funding is available, but from the time you start a project, get the permit and get it done, that's where Canada suffered.
Now, I know when you took the helm at CN Rail, there was some discontent among the customers about the service, and you said that was going to be one of your top priorities. Now that you've been in the job for a while, do you look back and think that when CN was really tightening the operation up, perhaps they went a little too far in tightening up the operation?
So CN being the biggest railroad in Canada, our role to move in the economy matters even more. So when we have challenge, the country feels it more. And if you look at the grain last year, grain and forest product with two segments of our customer base who weren't very satisfied with our service, whereby this year, if you take the example of grain, we have moved crop year to date, and the crop year starts August 1st to August 1st. We have moved 1.9 million metric ton more this year to date than last year. So obviously, this year, grain's been moving very well, despite these 7 weeks of very cold temperature in the prairies. And on the forest product side, we did a much better job making sure that the lumber can get to market. So in both cases, but in order to do that, you have to have the resource, the people resource and the equipment resource. And it's one of the reasons our costs this year are higher, because we had more resource. And the fact that we had more resource, we still could not only meet 3% revenue ton mile. However, that's still quite a bit more of last year in the Canadian prairies for the commodities that I just mentioned earlier.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you.
It was JJ Ruest. He's the president and CEO of CN Rail.